What? We gadena in yaragum, their kuninga thrum jefrunon, huda athalingas, Ellen fremeron. There was the scourge of mead halls, shield chafing, by the measure of men a good king. He laid his claim to the sea and the land as far as the shade of the great whale swam, and when death came to his majesty, they dressed him in his noble ship and sent him back to sea. The son of Shild's son's son was Hrothgar, and when he took up the throne, he shunned the devastation and built a mead hall of his own. Heorot was that hallowed hall called, where heroes drank their fill, where songs were sung and tales were spun, and mead horns splashed and spilled. The rich noise of their revelry filled the golden hall. It sprung out from their doors and windows and spilled across the lawn. But the song kept traveling further out through the mist and clouds, till it reached the ears of something that could not stand the sound. Was grimagast Grendel haten, mera merk stappa ze de mura seold fenon fasten. In the dead of night, when the Danes were drowsy with mead, the god-cursed Grendel struck. He tore 30 men from their sweet warm beds and blundered back to the black. He left naught but blood and bones, breadcrumbs of butchered gore. When dawn returned to Heorot, the horror was all laid bare. Empty beds and damp footsteps and the reek of blood in the air. Hrothgar watched on helpless as their wails rose up in that hall. Music was no more in Heorot. Grendel had taken it all. The next night brought back the beast, hungering again, and every evening after he returned for his feast of men. Hrothgar sought out counsel. He sent up prayers to God. He left sacrifices on burning fires, but night still brought in blood. For 12 long, lonely winters, Grendel never left their thoughts. The golden hall was his, all but the seat of Heorot. Word spread wide across land and sea of Grendel's cruel attacks, till it reached the ears of the Geat people and the hall of the noble Lord Higelac. Mercy moved the soul of that Geatish king, so through the wine-dark waves he sent a warrior in his name. The final hope of Heorot, this boldest hero came. Beowulf was that hero called, and he came before Hrothgar's throne, and he declared he would face Grendel unarmed and alone. Before the eyes of God, as the stories would come to tell, Beowulf took Hrothgar's hand and swore, "Ga tha wyrd, swahio shell." They laid out the feast with a place for Beowulf, and the bards struck up their songs. They strummed and sang of heroism, of Beowulf, tall, proud, and strong, his swimming of the boundless sea, battles fought and won, and Hrothgar welcomed him with open arms, accepting him as a son. Anticipation banished sleep as night turned to early hours, but just as always, Grendel staggered from the dark, ready to devour. He cracked open the hinges of Heorot, and his flame-flaring eyes saw the feast, and he stalked past the silent soldiers, counting them greatest to least. Grendel snapped his great black jaws and snatched the nearest man, and he smashed and crunched that body whole, but the bloodbath had just began. Grendel gulped the gushing gore, then his red gaze roved to the next man in the sleeping score, but before he could move past, Grendel was halted by a single hand. The grip of Beowulf blessed, held in a fastes, edhe mana was mayana strengest, on them die vises lives. In screaming, scrambling agony, the monster pitched and rolled. The pillars of Heorot shook, but as the men awoke to look and see, the beast could not escape the hold. With a snapping and a tearing sound, Grendel did go free, but his great arm had been severed at the shoulder clean. Smearing blood across the grass, Grendel limped the long way home, through the lonely marshes to the bleak and bouldered shore. He plunged beneath the waves, the waters closed about his head, and as all the lake stained frothy red, the monster at last fell dead. Then joy burst forth from Heorot, the richest of feasts laid out, and the bards they sang of the greatest of men, of Sigmund, Whale's son, and now Beowulf. They hung the banners of Heorot till it glimmered in gold like before, and with the arm of Grendel hung like a flag, the music poured free out the door. As the laughter rang and the people sang, Hrothgar took Beowulf to his side. He held him close, and he thanked the Lord as he bowed his head and cried. Relief awash in Heorot, they all laid down exhausted. Sigurna tu slape, sumsare anyald avenraste. Out of the stinking tarn, swaying under her own weight, came the fallen Grendel's mother, simmering with hate. The Hellbride had seen the forsaken fate of her greatest and dearest child, and she struck out seeking vengeance against all of man's fair kind. She slunk into the golden hall, slavering onto the floor, and she saw her son's arm hanging there, her rage filled and overpoured. The sleeping Danes awakened, but they could not see their swords, and in the fierce cacophony, Grendel's mother took what she was owed. Seizing up the closest soul, she clutched him to her breast, and she fled into the pitch-black night. His screams were all that was left. The sun rose to the horror, joy crashed down upon their grief, and though fear awoke in every man, Beowulf vowed to end this thief. Pursued by a royal retinue, they followed the sordid trail till they found themselves on the cold black rocks, the mother's dark lake shore. To Beowulf they gifted armor, a great helm and chainmail good, and the storied sword of Unferth, a blade that was tempered in blood. Never had this weapon failed to serve its wielder long, and in the hand of Beowulf it sang its sanguine song. Without a further utterance, Beowulf dove beneath the waves, and silence closed about the land as he swam down to the cave. For a day or more he labored, till at last, at the base of the lake, there was a light in the dark, but as that light grew close, he realized his mistake. The mother of Grendel lunged at him, drooling for the fight. Her talons bit into his armor as she clutched the hero tight. She bore him to her watery morgue, where the hell light cast broad shade. The Merwif Mittig loomed over Beowulf as he raised his mighty blade. It was then that the sword of Unferth, falling on the monster's neck, it failed the forsworn hero. It would not cut the cursed flesh. Beowulf cast the sword aside, and armed with naught but the grace of God, he threw himself at Grendel's mother, and the Hell Dame took him on. They grappled on the grimy floor, a battle fierce and wild, till Beowulf saw a massive sword atop the monster's pile. It was the blade of a fallen giant that naught but the greatest could bear, and Beowulf took it up, swung it, and let it fall on the beast's foul head. Heon flet ye krong, sweor was swatig, sedweorke ye fe. That mother of the outcast writhed in the briny mud, and the light of heaven, a clear white beam, cut in through the murky flood. Grendel's mother heaved and breathed her final quaking breath, as Beowulf found her child's head and brought it up from the depths. As he broke the steely surface, relief burst out across the land. The Danes fell to their knees and thanked the Lord on that wretched marshy strand. A song struck up in Heorot, stronger than ever before. They sang of victories new and old, and of their brave and boldest Beowulf. Hrothgar took the hero before his seat and bade him listen closely, and he marveled that Almighty God should permit such a sweet, sudden victory. But there was a warning, too, from the wise old lord, a lesson he'd learned well. Beowulf had slaughtered monsters, made his name, he'd come unscathed from hell. But for every man, even the hero, time beats a heavy drum. Marching on insatiable, death was sure to come. The next morning, they laid him with gold and with praise, and they spoke the fondest farewells. For though Beowulf was gone, he'd never quite leave the legends and stories they'd tell. Long Beowulf sailed on tossing seas, retracing the steps that he'd roamed, and his path bore him back on the wide white-capped waves, all the way to home. The stories spread of his victories, his triumph over death, and the warriors and bards and every soul there listened with bated breath. His wealth and his tales were all taken in, and Hygelac held him close. And when the time came, on his deathbed, Beowulf was the successor he chose. And so, warrior turned king, for 50 fair years he ruled his holy ground, and though his bright eyes dimmed and his hair grew gray, his bold head never bowed. But evil unresting darkened the land, a shadow that none could expel, and all that it took was a thief in the night to waken a monster of hell. This thief thought of little, except for his freedom, escaping his master's chains, and when he came to a cave and found it full of fine treasure, he thought nothing of shadow and flame. He grabbed up the gilded, gem-crusted goblet and scrambled to long-sought freedom, but the shaking and jingling followed his trail. It rang louder than any drum. A primal, crackling purr stirred up a steaming, stinking cloud, and as the dragon's eye split through the dark, his rumbling rage aroused. He looked about his precious hoard and knew that he'd been duped, and as the rattling hum ramped up to a roar, his fetid flames he spewed. The dragon unwound from centuries' rest and took up to the skies, spouting flame across the ground as he searched for the thief and his prize. The Geatland was all aflame, black smoke belched unto heaven. Homesteads, halls, and hearths alike left little more than rubble. A grief this was to Beowulf, who'd bested land and sea, that this creature of flame should challenge him, but he'd not lay down arms easily. Though time had played its wicked tricks, his arm had not yet failed, and this monster had challenged his very own home. He stood as tall as he could and swore, Ich eomon more from, that ich with thone guth flogen, yilp officite. So Beowulf took up his helm and his arms, dressed as he had long ago, and he marched out to face what fate had in store. He left all empty his throne. 11 men, all young and brave, eager to see their strength tried, followed their lord to the mouth of the cave, where he shouted, and the dragon replied. Grumbling and rumbling and growling his rage, he burst forth with shimmering flame. Beowulf raised up his shield and his sword as his final opponent thus came. He brought down his blade in a staggering blow, but skittered off solid scales, and the dragon drew in a rattling breath. The sword of Beowulf had failed. Looping tight around the king, who had naught but a shield for defense, the dragon let out a gout of flames, his coils closer pressed. Though they stood in safety, the men that had followed shivered to watch the fight, and one by one they choked on their fear and fled into the night. Only one was left standing. Beowulf was he, the warrior Wistan's son, and he swore, God wat on mek, his king would not face the weight of fate alone. He called out to the hero to bolster his strength and remind him of his youthful vow that as long as he stood and breathed and fought, he'd not let his legend be cowed. Strength flowed into Beowulf's warrior veins, and he raised his blade up high, and he brought it down on the bony skull, just between the eyes. But the old gray blade betrayed its bearer and shattered onto the sand, and he faced this monster as he'd once faced Grendel, with waiting and empty hands. The serpent spat a fiery flood, clamped its jaws round Beowulf's throat, and he writhed in its grasp as the venom gushed in and his lifeblood overflowed. Beowulf struck out madly, piercing the monster's breast, and the fire abated just enough for Beowulf to finish the rest. All he had was a dagger keen, small within his grasp, but he thrust it into the stinking flank, and the beast seethed and breathed his last. The light of heaven shone again, but it lit up a world in mourning. For though the battle was fought and done, death had caught up to the king. He bade Beowulf go into the lair to bring out the shining treasure, and he hauled it up stack by stack, to Beowulf's growing pleasure. He told the boy to take it home, for this and all the wealth he'd acquired would go to his people, and not with him. He'd go bare to his funeral pyre. Beowulf had had no sons, so he took young Wiglaf close. He handed him his holy helm, and with it the throne of the Geats. He named Wiglaf the last of the Wagemundings, so that their name would not die unheard, and he looked to the sky, said, "Ich him after Sheal," and that was his final word. As the king's soul parted, the coward men crept forth from the silent trees, and Wiglaf raised his weeping head and shamed them bitterly. If they had stood true to the blades that they bore, Beowulf may not have been dead, and without his rule, his legend, his name, the vultures were sure to descend. A cry went up in the heartland when they learned of their good lord's fate, and from afar they came, assembled there, to mourn Beowulf the Great. For all that he had loomed so large, a man so clearly blessed, he now lay broken, so silent and cold, and stories were all that was left. The people laid him with their hard-earned wealth, with gold and mail of their own, and they built him up a mighty pyre on that sorry beach of stone. The flames roared up and gulped the wood, they licked the hero's bones, and all heads were bowed, save for one woman who stood and sang alone. Sang so cherig, sa they that he heren yangas andre ide while full